Previously, we've already seen the other two flavors of functions, a plain function and also functions with inputs. But in today's lessons, we're going to be using the skills that we've learned, and we're going to be extending our knowledge of functions to build a calculator app. I think at some point in every programmer's lives, they will have built a calculator app. So if that hasn't already happened to you, then today is your lucky day, because that's exactly what we're going to be making. So it's a simple text-based calculator, and we can start off by writing a number and then picking one of the operations: plus, minus, multiply, or divide. So I'm going to divide this by 2, and then it shows us the full calculation: 5 divided by 2 equals 2.5. And now we can continue calculating with the answer from the previous step, or we can type n to start a new calculation. Let me type y, and maybe I'll do 2.5 plus 6, and now I get 8.5. By the end of the lessons today, you'll have understood how functions really work, how you can use them to reduce redundant code, and how you can provide inputs to functions as well as providing outputs. Once you're ready, head over to the next lesson and let's get started. To begin, the first thing I want to talk about is more on functions. So we've already seen a couple of things that we can do with functions. The first thing I showed you was how to create a very simple bog standard function using the def, the name, the empty parentheses, and then the colon. And then within the body of the function, you can do a bunch of things which will be carried out every single time you trigger or call the function, like this. And the first type of function basically just helps you reduce the amount of code you have to write when you have instructions that you want to execute repeatedly. Now, the next type of function we saw actually had something inside the parentheses, and this something is an input which can be passed over when we call the function. So in this case, 1, 2, 3 is the argument which gets passed in to this parameter called something, and then it gets used within the body of the function. The second type of function, the functions which allow for inputs, gives us the ability to modify the code in the function and to get it to do something different each time depending on what input was passed in. We're now on to the final sort of flavor of functions, and these are functions which allow you to have an output once the function is completed. We start off with a simple function, and in this case you'll notice that even though I'm actually not giving it any inputs. The inputs and the outputs are completely separate from each other. So this is a normal function that you've seen many times now. And within the body of the function, I'm going to do some piece of calculation. Let's say I'm going to calculate what is 3 times 2, and then save it to a variable called result. Now, once that's done, I can use the output keyword, which is return, and then after that keyword, I can put whatever it is I want to be the output of this function. So in this case, the output is the result. And what that means is when I call this function later on and it runs, then it will go ahead and output this result, and it replaces this line of code where this function was called. Now, that result is held in the code where the function was called, and I could save it to another variable. Result, of course, equals 3 times 2, and that means this output now equals 6. So this is what the code might look like. Somewhere I would define my function which has an output, which you can tell by the return keyword. Now, at some other point in my code, I decide to call that function. And once that function executes, that return, or whatever is outputted, replaces the function call. And at the very end, it means this variable output will store whatever the output is. So in this case, output would be equal to 6. The way that I like to think about functions with outputs is almost kind of like a machine, right? If you had a machine where in goes some empty bottles, and after some processing or some inputs, out comes a bottle filled with milk. So in this case, this function has an input, the empty glass bottle. It has an output, the glass bottle filled with milk. And in the middle, there's some processes or some code that's being executed to create this change. This ties together all the things that we've learned about functions.
So now head over to the starting file for today's lessons.
Let's start off by creating a new function, which I'm going to call format name. And the reason is because this function is going to take a first name and a last name, and it's going to change those inputs. Even if it was lowercase or if it was all caps, it's going to change it into title case. Something like this, where the first letter is capitalized in each word. To begin, I want you to create this function and then go ahead and add two inputs to it. One called fname, so first name, and another called lname, which is the last name. Pause the video and give that a go. Alright, so all we have to do to add inputs to our function is just to put the names of these parameters inside the parentheses. So now our function is able to take these parameters as inputs whenever this function gets called. The next step is we're going to convert these strings that gets passed in. So it could be something like this, all lowercase, it could be all capitalized, or it could be kind of random, right? Like some are capitalized, some are not. But we're going to make it all uniform. So all of these are going to end up like this. And to do this, we can search around in Google, and you might come across a similar question in Stack Overflow. How do you convert a string to title case in Python?